वतन में जब एक दिन सब जाने वाले जाएंगे, दरबारे वतन में जब एक दिन सब जाने वाले जाएंगे, कुछ अपनी सजा को पहुंचेंगे, कुछ अपनी सजा ले जाएंगे.
From Praful Bidwai, who's just finished a book on the basic countries and their role in the climate change negotiations.
I tried to show that the big emitters of the developed countries have not fulfilled their commitments because they don't want to give up their fossil fuel addiction. But basic is deeply ambivalent about two things. One, it talks about equity at the international level, but none of the basic governments is committed to equity at the domestic level. But,
right.
Equity at the domestic level is very, very important.
Yes,
what you do for the poor and what you do to restrict the luxury consumption of the rich is as relevant.
So what you're saying is India always plays this equity card, but it doesn't seem to apply it domestically. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's one big ambivalence, that one big contradiction. Another anomaly is that basic talks of equity today, but 2 years ago, what did it do? It joined hands, these four countries, Brazil, South Africa, India and China, joined hands with the world's biggest polluter, namely the United States, and these 5 countries alone signed a collusive deal called the Copenhagen Accord, which was then imposed on more than 100 countries of the world through coercion, bribery and so on. I am shocked and pained, but I'm not surprised, because the same judge, John Keenan, had earlier treated this case shabbily in 1985, 1986. He turned down the government of India's plea that the case be held in the United States. He ruled on a very poor principle called forum non-convenience and sent the case back to India, giving no justice to the victims. Now, his judgment is wrong and perverse in so many ways. First of all, Union Carbide Corporation was a really shell company. 51% owned by Union Carbide Corporation of Danbury, Connecticut. Every single operational decision, every single design decision, every single minute decision about what pesticide to make, how much to store, what substances to import, what substances to export, was made through a wholly owned subsidiary of Union Carbide Corporation called Union Carbide Eastern, based in Hong Kong.
Right.
So Union Carbide India Limited had absolutely no agency, no direct role at all. So it's Union Carbide Corporation's liability 100%, and this was documented not just by journalists like me, but by scientists, engineers, by government experts, and so on and so forth. Namely, that the accident occurred because of major fatal design flaws for which Union Carbide Corporation was responsible.
Must be held responsible.
Right.
Right.
The operating practices were specified in the minutest detail by Union Carbide Corporation. The accident's handling was determined by Union Carbide Corporation, which refused to part with vital information on how to treat the victims of MIC, methyl isocyanate, which is a proprietary chemical on which UCC alone had the necessary information.
Right.
So it's UCC right through, and its board of directors, including Warren Anderson, the chairman, who was obviously responsible. Now, Union Carbide was taken over 100% by Dow Chemical, and Dow must take over the liability.
From nuclear disarmament to the issue of global warming, make the connection why this is such a critical issue for you and for India and the world.
Well, just as during the Cold War, nuclear weapons threatened the very existence of the world, I think now we have climate change, which is the biggest threat to the survival of humanity, of humankind and civilization as we know it today. And so for me, the connections have to do with survival, with fighting for a more just and humane world order, and for making for a sustainable future for all of us. We need to talk about other norms or other criteria. For instance, there's a good framework called the Greenhouse Development Rights Framework, which says let's draw a development threshold cutting across the countries of the world. Those who are above the development threshold must bear the responsibility in proportion to their contribution to global warming. Those below the threshold should not have to bear any responsibility, whether they live in the developed countries or the developing countries. If you use that criterion, you get a much more balanced picture than what is being painted now. I think Fukushima is a turning point. I don't see nuclear power surviving in the developed world at all after this. This is the worst crisis of credibility that the nuclear industry has ever faced. The fact that it could happen in an extremely developed and highly skilled country like Japan means that we ought to be really, really afraid of similar accidents happening. And we know from engineers and operators and designers of nuclear plants that such a meltdown accident of the kind that took place at 3 Mile Island in 1979 in the United States, or Chernobyl in Ukraine, could happen in any of the existing reactor types in the world. There are 400 of them. So the probability of such an accident occurring is disturbingly high, maybe one meltdown every 8 years, and that's simply not acceptable.
In Pakistan is an even poorer country. The latest Human Development Report of the UNDP shows that India and Pakistan rank within the bottom third of all countries in the world, all 174 countries of the world for which the index has been listed and tabled. And India's position is now 124, Pakistan is 135. So you can have 7% growth, you can have 5% growth, you can have the Hindu rate of growth of 3 or 3.5%. The Human Development Index hasn't shifted much. So it's a huge cost we are paying in terms of, and what is that cost? Let's understand what lies behind these figures. What is actually happening is that half our population is growing up without the bare minimum of human potential, right, to do simple things. They will not have brains large enough, they will not have nutrition levels that are sufficient for them to function even physically or mentally as full-fledged human beings. More than half of them will grow underweight. More than half of all Indian women who are pregnant will actually be severely anemic and will give birth to babies that are underweight, a proportion that is higher, almost twice as high as the proportion of underfed women and children in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is probably the most desperate part of the world. We have reached a situation where, in the name of security, in the name of national security, we are actually making ourselves more insecure, less capable of being a human society, less capable of functioning as full-fledged human beings, less capable of managing internal conflict, less capable of actually making the right priorities, and so on and so forth. There's a huge cost to pay. So this means that you are perverting your priorities. You are saying to yourself, what matters is just security. Everything else can go to hell. And placing your faith in the use of force to deliver all kinds of things. And that is what is known as militarism and militarization. For the killings in Gujarat, most of the cases there have been closed. I mean, this is the worst set of massacres that took place in your and my living memory. 2,000 people butchered in the course of less than a month, right? With state support, state collusion, state organization. And not one person has so far been punished. For the massacres that followed Godhra, right? 37 out of 43 cases of big, substantial killings have been closed, and people have either been acquitted or the cases have been suspended. You can't, I mean, this is a travesty of justice delivery. but extreme measures, in the belief that the more force you use, the more effective it will be. You have today parties and forces in power in both countries, some of whom at least have a stake in continuing and intensifying and maintaining their hostility. So they both need each other in that sense, and you have that sort of situation increasingly.
In Russian reactors, there was a very damning report which was published last year about the state of the Russian nuclear industry, which is run by the mafia. I'm sorry, that is what is happening in many industries in Russia. And this is, in fact, the committee appointed by the then president actually identified 31 flaws in the design of these reactors, including their safety systems. And there's no reason to believe that this particular model of the reactor that's being installed is any better than the others. People also know about the generic problems of nuclear technology, which is inherently hazardous. After what happened in Fukushima and in Chernobyl, nobody is going to be assured by a team of Sarkari scientists who have a premeditated conclusion that everything is safe and that people are ignorant, they're foolish, they're foreign funded. I mean, this is the kind of intemperate language we have heard from day one from Mr. Narayan Swamy, from the Prime Minister, who have descended, I'm sorry, to the gutter level. And this is not going to convince people. They are not irrational. They've been fasting, they've been sacrificing their income.
Okay.
All of them are literate, by the way. All of them, 100% literacy in the area. They're very intelligent. They watch what is happening in the world. They know what plutonium is. They will tell you that the half-life of plutonium is 24,400 years.
Okay.
That means it remains hazardous for a
Okay.
very long time. People like that have to be convinced in a reasonable manner through consensus, through scientific debate, and not to be treated as criminals. You know how many cases have been filed for sedition?
Yes, that's what-
6,980. Can you believe that in an area where there has not been a single incidence of violence, this is sedition and waging war against the state? How absurd can you get? You see,
Okay.
this is the kind of trampling of democratic rights that
Okay.
has aggravated the situation.